Croatia has become one of Europe's hottest destinations, but most tourists are doing it wrong. After spending 6 days exploring Plitvice's waterfalls to Dubrovnik's ancient walls, I'll show you exactly how to experience Croatian magic without the tourist traps. In just 6 days, we've discovered why this country is the Mediterranean's most spoken of destination. From taking in breathtaking waterfalls, to exploring Game of Thrones filming locations, to discovering coastal towns that rival the French Riviera, all while navigating the crowds. Here's exactly what we did and what I would recommend for your Croatian adventure. Our first destination was Plitvice Lakes. We had driven from Ljubljana and we'd managed to get there early in the day and gotten ourselves a car park right outside the front gate. When we arrived at the national park, we had originally planned to just do Route A, which was the lower lakes, which included the big waterfall and a few other smaller ones. However, when we had finished Route A, we were at the ferry terminal to take us to the upper lakes, and we had only just started our day really, so we decided to go along with Route C, which would do the upper lakes as well. There's a lot to see on both sections, and there's probably a little bit more walking to do in the upper lakes, but we were able to do it pretty easily with half a day of walking. The first day took us about 4 hours and we covered 7 to 8 kilometers of distance. The waterfalls are absolutely everywhere. You're walking on the planks of wood and water is just rushing underneath your feet. It's really a fantastic experience. The only thing that would be a little bit negative is Plitvice Lakes had not received any water for the last 5 months, so there'd been no rain there, which meant that the waterfall probably wasn't in its full raging glory. But what we had managed to do is our entire 2-day itinerary in 1 day, in fact only in about 4 hours. Just to get a quick overview of it, we did Route C, which took us from lower lakes to upper lakes. You have to catch a ferry to get to upper lakes, and then you can catch a bus back to the lower lakes where you parked your car. So it's very easy to get around. It wasn't terribly strenuous at all, and I think it's well within anyone's ability to do it in 1 day. We stayed nearby the national park because we were planning on doing 2 days, and there was quite a bit of rain overnight. So we thought we'd use our 2nd-day pass and go back in and at least look at the big waterfall. And there was definitely a little bit more water flowing, but I still feel like it could be more impressive with a bit more rain, but it's just something to keep in mind if you're doing your trip. The conditions might change a little bit, but I'd say no matter the conditions, it's definitely worth going. It's Croatia's oldest national park, and it's just a great experience to be there. Also, another noteworthy thing is the color of the water is pretty breathtaking as well, so make sure you try and capture that when you're there. In order to gain access to the national park, you do have to pre-book tickets. There is a few places that you can get them there, but they are also time restrained and they can book out. So we booked ours well in advance to make sure that we were going to be able to see the Plitvice National Park on the days that we wanted to. So the price of the tickets is €35 per person per day. And for the time that we were parked there, we paid about €17, which is an additional cost. Some quick tips for this destination in particular is you want to get there early. We found that we got there around 8:30 and there wasn't that many people around, and it gave us a good opportunity to see the sights without having to fight our way through crowds. I think the time of year is also important, so we were there in early September, which is probably close to a shoulder season, which means that you aren't going to get the crazy crowds that you can often end up with in summer. This also allows you to get a park. Although it's paid, they do fill up and it can be a bit of a challenge to get parking. There is also an additional spot where you can see the big waterfall without access to a ticket or gaining entry into the park, just so that if you are a little bit short on money, or if you don't really want to go and see the whole of the park, then maybe you can just drop in and see big waterfall, which is what a lot of people go for. It also might help if you want to check how the waterfall's going and if it's worth your money to go and see it on that particular day. Just one other thing is, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I think that usually is an indication of how impressive this space can be. Now that we've wrapped up in Plitvice National Park, we actually then went and stayed in Split, just because it was a little bit closer to the next destination that we wanted to go to. It's now day 3 on our adventure. The first 2 were at Plitvice National Park, and day 3 we've woken up in Split, and now we take a 1-hour drive from Split and we go to Krka National Park. This is another one where you need to book a time slot and you have to arrive and go in at that specific time slot. So we booked 8 to 9 because the entire trip, what we found is it's been a bit of a superpower to wake up early because most Europeans don't, and a lot of people traveling don't. If you get there early, you tend to miss the crowds. For each person to gain access into Krka National Park, it was €40, and what that includes is a shuttle bus from the top location where it then takes you down to the actual Krka National Park. Otherwise, your option is to walk it, which is about 800 meters, which would be not too bad on the way down, but I think absolutely terrible on the way back up because it is quite a far way down from where the cars are parked. We did the Skridinsky loop, and I probably butchered the name there. It's a relatively short loop and it takes you by the largest waterfall in the area. It's about 2 kilometers in length. It's a very beautiful waterfall. I think if there was a lot of people, it could be quite unpleasant because if you're trying to look at the waterfall, you have to cross a bridge, and there's constantly people walking there even when we arrived there. And when we were actually leaving, I'll show some footage here, it was absolute mayhem with how many people had arrived before about 9 o'clock. And then after 9 o'clock, it would be unpleasant to be out there with that many people. Krka National Park is actually a massive space, and you do have the option to pay more to then go on a ferry down through the river, but we decided not to opt for that. There's a lot of history there as well, and you can gain some insight into how people live. If I had to compare Plitvice and Krka National Park, I'd say that they're both beautiful, but they offer slightly different things. Plitvice is more get to see the environment, and it's kind of, it feels like the only thing that's man-made about it is the pathways that get you to and from different locations. Whereas with Krka National Park, there's a little bit more going on and there's more history within the park itself. So I think both are good to do. I would definitely do both. One other thing to keep in mind is that in the past you have been able to swim at Krka National Park, but when we were there, we found that that was not an option. So just make sure that you do your fact checking when you're going there, because it would be a little bit disappointing if you go there on a hot day expecting to swim and then you find out that you can't. Unfortunately, that isn't something that differentiates Plitvice and Krka anymore. So our destination 3 is actually Split, where we went from to get to Krka National Park. Split is an awesome town, and it's a huge harbour, and you get a lot of traffic that comes in from there, especially from cruise ships, and massive ones at that. There's also a marina where there's lots of yachts parked in the bay. We walked through and were absolutely stunned by some of the ships that were there. I think another thing to keep in mind with Croatia is that you always need to go and check out the old town. They seem to be preserved really well and also used extremely well. And Split is no exception to this. So when you're wandering around the streets, they're obviously quite compact. No cars are allowed in there, and there's generally a fair few people walking around. There's so much down every alley, and you can get lost so easily. This is one of the locations where some of the Game of Thrones was filmed, and you can definitely see why. A lot of the buildings still feel quite ancient. We had a Mexican in the middle of the old town, and it was a fantastic experience, but there's food everywhere, and there's ruins, and there's so much to see. If you enjoy your history, I think you would get lost in a place like this. It would be a great atmosphere to have a few drinks, and I think it ends up being a bit of a party town at night. Once we'd wrapped up in the old town, we actually did make our way to one of the beaches, and there's a beach that's quite near to the town, which I'll leave in the description below. I wouldn't say it was the most beautiful beach I've ever been to, but if you're feeling hot after walking through the old city, it's definitely easy to jump into the water there and just go for a swim. They can be a little bit crowded, but I think that's just how European beaches tend to be. And the water isn't super clean. If you're holding out for crystal clear water, maybe wait until our next destination. For day 4, we actually left from Split and we were heading down the coastline, and we were heading to Dubrovnik. But we actually stopped at a small seaside town called Markoska. It was about 2 hours from Split to arrive at this location, and it split up our journey from going from Split to Dubrovnik. We arrived at about 10 a.m. It was reasonably quiet at that time, and we managed to find a park on the streets, and €2 per hour, which I feel is pretty standard throughout Europe, at least through Croatia. The beach was absolutely stunning, and it felt like you were definitely on a European coastline. The waters were very clear and the colour of the water was unbelievable. This beach was substantially better than what we had seen in Split. There was also a few water sports where people were jet skiing and also parasailing, which looked like a lot of fun, but unfortunately we didn't have enough time for that. The beach access was also free, and it was still stone beaches, Although we walked around the corner and we actually jumped off the rocks where there's these great umbrellas that sit on the edge of the coastline. You can sit in the sun and then just jump into the ocean, and there's little ladders to climb up when you're done swimming. I think this was probably the best location that we experienced on our whole trip for swimming, and Croatian waters, this is what I imagine. It's also got incredible views. So I remember looking from the peninsula where you can look across the bay and then to the city's beach, and then you see the city in the background and the mountains in the background after that. It reminded me a little bit of Cape Town, and it was absolutely beautiful. If you're doing the trip from Split to Dubrovnik, you certainly have to stop here. And just so you're aware, the road that we took is the D8 road instead of the highway. This is probably one of our top 2 roads for the whole trip that we've driven in Europe. It was jaw-dropping the whole way along. So once we'd wrapped up at destination 4, we continued to make our way to Dubrovnik, which, as I'm sure you've already guessed, is our destination 5. Once we arrived there, we got settled in, and one of the first things that we did was a walking tour. I would have to recommend this for absolutely everyone, because I think it gives so much more meaning to a place when you understand it a little bit better. And Dubrovnik in particular is a city that has so much complexity that you would have no idea of if you just walked around and through it. The walking tours are free, and I'll leave a link in the description for them. But usually how these tours work is the guide will take you through the city and explain sites and a bit of the history of the place, and then they rely on you giving them a tip at the end of the day, because that's how they make their money. We have found every time we've done this that it's been a great experience, and again, I would recommend it to everyone. So for day 5, we continue to explore Dubrovnik because there really is so much to do. And in particular, we're talking about the old town here. And there's so many streets that you can walk through and wander around. But our main agenda for our 5th day was to make sure that we experienced the medieval walls that are built around the city and still completely standing. You have to pay to be able to get up on the walls, and it's €40, but a good thing to know is that you can get the Dubrovnik Pass, which is also €40. So it's a bit of a no-brainer because that gives you access to the walls, and then it gives you access to any of the museums that are owned by Dubrovnik City. You can book those tickets online, and once you've spent that money, you then just scan it on your phone and you can walk up onto the walls. We aimed to get on the walls pretty much as early as we could, which was 8:30, and at that time it was already starting to get a bit busy. So I think even earlier is better if you can. It took us about an hour to work our way around the whole of the outside of the walls. It is a massive space, and it gives you panoramic views of everything around the old city, and honestly, you would be crazy not to do this. I'll put some footage here of us walking around the walls, and you'll get a bit of an insight into what it might feel like to be on them yourself. After that, we then went and visited some of those museums that were included in the pass, such as the monastery, and we also went into the Maritime Museum. At that point, we had probably had enough of walking. I think we'd done about 12 kilometers at that stage, and we decided to grab a bite to eat before we went for a swim. Now, there's a main beach in Dubrovnik, and that's where everyone goes, and it gets very busy. But we also heard about a little spot that's tucked away and less people know about it. And I'll leave that in the description as well. And this little spot is absolutely awesome. It's tucked away between 2 cliffs, and it's a great spot to swim. You can definitely tell that because there's usually a fair few locals there. For our day 6, we would have loved to have stayed in Dubrovnik and kept exploring. However, due to the cost of picking up a rental car from one destination and leaving it at another, we had to start our journey back to Milan. We drove from Dubrovnik up through to Rijeka, and that's quite a long drive, but with some music, podcasts, or an audiobook, it's not too bad. It's definitely enjoyable to drive through the roads of Croatia, and there's a lot to see there. With only really 5 days being spent in Croatia, we could already understand why it's on the list for so many people. If our Croatia trip has helped you to plan your own, or if it's maybe given you some ideas, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps us a lot. And I'm going to be doing a lot more content on Europe going forward and more travel content. If you have been to Croatia or if you live here, please let me know if I've got it all wrong and there's better places to go. Leave your thoughts in the comment. More news is that next week I'll be doing the Dolomites, which was one of the main reasons we came to Europe in the first place. And I know there's a lot of interest around them, so Stay tuned for that one and hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when a new video is published by me. Until then, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.